right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. So I am Kurt Schiller, and I am the editor of Blood Knife magazine. Sorry, I'm talking a little bit quietly. It is 1 in the morning where I am at, and I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old who I am trying to not wake up. Tonight I am going to be talking about how to start a magazine for $200. Or how to do a bad idea goodly. You'll probably hear some cat noises in the background. My cats are very, very vocal. Uh, so, oh goodness gracious, he's really talking. What is Blood Knife? I'm gonna go and give my cat some food. I have to apologize. Give me 30 seconds. I can't think when he's yelling at me like that. Okay, sorry about that. Unexpected guest host from my cat, Mr. Mustard. Like I was saying, I'm Kurt. I'm the editor of Blood Knife magazine. Blood Knife is a digital magazine about sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and capitalism. We publish original work and pay fairly. Primarily, we publish media criticism and cultural criticism pieces about sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. We use sci-fi, fantasy, and horror media to talk about cultural issues. We, write about topics like sexism, racism, gender, all through pretty much I would say almost exclusively through sci-fi, fantasy, and horror as a critical lens to engage with those topics. Um, we have been featured or linked or mentioned in publications like Slate, the New York Times, Washington Post, and NPR. We started shortly after the pandemic started and everyone was locked inside. And I went, I've been thinking about doing something like this. Why not do it now? Although I'll talk a little bit more in a second about, in particular, why I started the magazine and where it was coming from. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of our growth as a magazine and how that plays into some of the processes and structures that we used, but we were bootstrapped, basically just spending a little bit of money out of my own pocket. But we've been self-sufficient since I think since the end of last summer is about where we hit a break-even point where our revenue covered all of our expenses, and I was no longer losing money on each issue. And my goal with this webinar is, I think that the ability to, start a publication obviously is a great privilege. But I think that a lot of the models that people try to use and that I've seen people try to use are they either overcomplicate things or they undercut the strengths that they could be bringing to the table. And so I wanted to share basically the methodology that I use to start and grow the publication in the hope that other people will be able to do the same thing. Because I think that, having more independent media, more independent publications is a net good, not just for the internet, but for the quality of discourse and discussion on the internet, which is often quite bad. We are primarily a nonfiction publication, but I think a lot of the same things that I'll be talking about here can also be used for fiction magazines. And I will say upfront, I'm talking, part of that $200 is eliminating the idea of a print publication, at least for the time being. Print, it tends to be very, very expensive and difficult in my experience anyway. So I'm talking pretty much solely about a digital magazine. So with that out of the way, there we go. Why did I start Blood Knife? The silly answer is that I watched I watched a weird French movie called Blood Machines, which is kind of like it's basically an hour-long sci-fi horror synthwave music video. And it was very strange. It's a very sticky, weird, visually gorgeous, but sometimes fraught thematically movie. I watched it on the streaming service Shudder. It was very enjoyable, and I went, man, I want to write something about this. That would be fun. Where can I do that? And I I pitched a piece of a few places, and then I kind of lost interest in the process of pitching. And I said, I should just restart a blog. And maybe I thought to myself, maybe if I have a blog, maybe I can get free movies out of it to write about movies. Maybe people will let me write about movies and let me see the movies for free. That's mostly not the case anymore. This was something of a naive assumption on my part. It's doable. You can get there. But like most things, it's a bit of a grind. The somewhat more intelligent reason that I started Blood Knife is that, from my point of view, online publishing is very badly broken. And when I say that, what I mean is that it's bad for everyone. It's bad for audiences. It's bad for the writers. It's very bad for the writers. I'll get to that in a minute. And it's bad for the publications themselves. Most online publications operate at a loss. The big ones, things like Gawker and Kotaku, for the most part, they're either burning month to month through the money of some well-intentioned or not well-intentioned rich person, or through somebody's venture capital and private equity firm, or it's just like a labor of love, and they're just like frittering money away. And the reasons for that are manifold. The big one, though, is there's, simply speaking, minimal revenue in the traditional forms of revenue that publications have relied on the internet. Advertising online is a huge industry. Google and Facebook and Twitter have all built their empires on the backs of online advertising. The issue is they're taking the majority of the revenue and there is a lot of it that gets spent in online advertising. The amount of money that a site, even a very large publication like Gawker or Kotaku or whatever, brings in from their advertising is, by comparison, a pittance. And that means that using the old kind of traditional media model, where you have like a very large staff of writers, or staff of kind of like editorial staff, and then a bunch of writers, freelancing for less and less money, unfortunately, as time goes on. It's just a lot of overhead to cover, and the revenue just isn't there. And that's built around the kind of free model of giving stuff away just completely. The other thing that, in my opinion, makes online publishing broken is low quality. And I'll get to that in a minute, but most articles that come out are just not very good. They're just kind of like flash in the pan things that you look at once and forget. They don't invite any kind of critical discourse. They don't invite any kind of greater thought. They don't have really any particular investment in the content. It's just like trying to get eyeballs. I'm sure everyone has seen clickbait articles that either have like a salacious headline that doesn't really match up with the content of the article, or it's something like 5 secrets to, whatevering the newest widget. I don't know, but just garbage. Unfortunately, the online content economy is built on garbage now. No differentiation. A lot of daily updating big blogs, it's essentially what they are. Most digital publications are essentially a blog. Aren't differentiated from each other. You get the same few articles each day from hundreds and hundreds of sites. And that leads to the last problem, which is no stickiness. The thing that makes a website, the thing that makes a magazine, and a publication is not just one piece of content. It's a lot of pieces of content. If somebody comes to your site and reads just the thing that sent them there and then leaves again, they bounce out. You don't really have a publication. You have a collection of pages. And that's how most sites are now. There's nothing to keep you at the site because they're not offering a unique viewpoint. They're not offering unique content. There's no reason for you to build a relationship with that publication versus any other one. Things are a bit better, I think. I will say, in sci-fi and fantasy publishing, where people do still prioritize like a unique voice and a unique point of view. But even there, I think that publications could probably put more time into really defining what makes them, and that makes them sticky for a reader. Because ideally, when you come to a new site, you want to get a good idea of what that site's about, and if that site is catering to you as an audience, you should want to stay there and be like, well, let me see what else is here, and then hopefully become a lifelong reader of that site or a publication. I mentioned a lack of differentiation, and this is before I get to kind of the methodology. This was an exercise that I did the first time that I ran this talk. which was I went to the front page of IO9. I think this was last July, I think it was. And I took a look at the front page. And I used to work as a journalist, and I spent a lot of time rewriting press releases. And unfortunately, when you break down what is at the top of the page on this page, it's fairly common breakdown of like a news and media and culture site like IO9 or Gizmodo or Gawker, you're going to get a lot of press releases. 4 of the 6 things on this above the fold page, which is like what you are going to see if you come to the homepage of IO9 somehow a year ago, was basically 2/3 rewritten press releases. I'm sure most people are familiar with press releases. They're basically a condensed bunch of snippets and kind of pre-written facts so that you can easily write an article about it. So when I looked at this, I focused in particular on that Star Wars Vision spin-off novel story. And I looked at that and I said, I bet that's a press release, and I bet that I can find the press release that was written off of. The other thing I'll mention is the other 2 things are there's a piece of syndicated content from Lightspeed, actually, which is awesome. I did not know at the time that the IO9 did that. That's super cool. I love seeing SFF publications get out there. I love seeing more people encounter short stories. So that's great. But from IO9's point of view, that's not even really like their content. It's not really benefiting them, although it is benefiting Lightspeed, which is great. The last one down at the bottom there is just a link. It just takes you off site. So again, you're not staying on the site. So back to the press release, I went looking for it, and sure enough, I found it. It's basically a rewritten article from StarWars.com, which is basically like an internal, not internal, a self-run blog for the Star Wars brand that Disney/LucasArts runs. They basically do it in lieu of press releases, or in lieu of exclusive press releases. They kind of write about them as if they are a blog article. And sure enough, the headline is very similar. The art is, the same art. If you go through the article, it's basically the same article. So my question is, if you're a reader, ultimately, why would you go to a site like IO9 when you can get it from the source at StarWars.com? It's a piece of low quality content that probably got a lot of readership in the moment, but doesn't do anything long term for IO9 as a site apart from getting some clicks on that one day. And more to the point, why would you go to IO9 when you can get the same thing from the dozens and dozens of other websites that wrote more or less the same article, with the same screenshot, more or less the same headline? And that's kind of the situation of a lot of content on the internet right now, unfortunately. So back to how to start a magazine. I decided that I wanted to take a crack at starting a digital magazine. And to do that, I decided to sit down and establish some principles. And this I would suggest as the starting point for anyone who is interested in starting a magazine, or really any kind of a publication, because if you don't decide what you are or what you're going to be, you're essentially deciding to be nothing, or deciding to be anything, which is the same thing as being nothing. So I wanted to sit down and make a list of things that I wanted to accomplish by starting it. The first thing was I knew that I would not be able to publish the volume of articles that a site like Gawker produces. I would only be able to put out a few articles a month at most. So I wanted them to be as good as possible. I wanted them to be high quality articles, and try to make each one as good as it could possibly be. So no clickbait, no junk. To this day, we probably publish about 6 to 8 at most articles each month. I wanted to get other writers. I have 2 kids. I have a full-time job. I wasn't going to be able to write 4 to 6 articles each month. So I needed a model where I could get other writers involved. I wanted them to be viral and shareable pieces. In other words, I wanted them to be things that people would want to share to other people. That's one of the best ways still to get traffic, and there's ways to do that without it being clickbait. I wanted to be visually interesting. I really hate how all publications all online publications for the most part look very similar, or they just kind of look just like they look fine, but just kind of like so and so. I wanted to go back to kind of when websites were a little bit weirder, and you got like a tangible sense of what the publication was like from the experience of using their website. the last two are super important. One, I wanted it to be equitable. Um, my political values being what they are, I would say very, very far left. I wanted to be able to pay people fairly. It crushes me how badly people are paid for online content, which is super important to the functioning of the internet. There was a thread recently on Twitter where somebody from, oh gosh, I don't remember what website it was. It was IGN. Posted about how they were looking for freelance writers, keen, hardworking individuals who were looking to make $30 an article. Which, like, $30 an article for anything remotely decent is nothing. That's just garbage. It's an unacceptable amount of pay. Blood Knife has never paid that low in the entire history of the magazine. Even when we first launched, I was paying for it out of pocket. So to me, it's inexcusable that people get paid that low. I wanted to be able to pay at least commensurate. Basically, any revenue that we got, I wanted to be able to redirect towards paying people and to pay them as much as possible and as fairly as possible. And finally, I wanted to be self-sufficient. I wanted it to get to where it wasn't losing me money each month, and it could just kind of keep running on its own and keep running and running forever. And we did get there eventually, and I credit that in part to the fact that I sat down and said, "This is my goal. I want to get here. Here's the point that I need to get to, and let's figure out ways to get there." So some things you'll need to start a magazine for $200. You'll need to be able to write, or you'll need somebody that can write. There's a lot of incidental content copy that goes into any magazine, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. So you'll need that. You'll need someone or yourself needs to be able to edit, and not just line and copy editing, but structural editing. And I'll talk a little bit about the process that I use for kind of the structural developmental editing in a little bit. You're going to need someone who can do visual design, or at least has a good sense of it. There's a lot of free tools or low-cost tools out there that can obviate a lot of the really nitty-gritty design skills that you need, but you still need someone, yourself or someone else, who has an eye for design, at the very least, to be able to look at what you're making online and say, like, is this layout decent or not? You're going to need someone who can take care of the internet nonsense, which is all the back end of the website, the server, the hosting. Fortuitously for me, I can do most of these things myself. Probably visual design is probably the worst. I've been a writer and editor for a bit over a decade now, so I'm pretty good at those things. And I've been doing internet nonsense for a long time, so I'm pretty good at that too. Visual design, I do have a friend who helps me out. There's now a small team at Blood Knife, 4 people. We have an art director and some assistant editors, but at start it was just me. And the last thing is patience. And this is the first time of many that patience will be a bullet point in this. None of this stuff is going to take off right away. By starting a magazine or publication, you're setting off on a long journey for whatever your goal is. If it's to make money, it's an extremely long journey. If it's to get people to read it, it's still a pretty long journey. So above all, patience. Nothing is going to happen right away. The internet moves fast, except when it doesn't, and starting out from scratch is usually a slow process. So you're going to just need to have a ton of patience and forgiveness for yourself, because there's going to come times when you're going to be like, I can't believe nothing has happened. Nobody's reading my website. Whatever it is, something is going to ail you, and the key is usually just keep trucking, just patience. On a functional level, and this is where we get into that $200 number. So there's some things that an online magazine needs. In my opinion, the first one is a domain name. You know what? I skipped one thing. $200 to start a magazine for $200 or not. You can run this process with effectively $0. There's free alternatives to basically everything that I have on here that costs money. This is the minimum that I would recommend, though. $200 is itself a privilege. A lot of people don't have $200. If you don't, I would suggest getting multiple people together. You could do this all for free, though. It is possible. I think that it becomes harder, though, I will say. So in terms of resource allocation, what does a magazine need? I think that if you're trying to establish a memorable brand, which is essentially what you're trying to do, you really want a domain name, and a catchy, memorable one. The name Blood Knife was basically just me going through different combinations of 2-word phrases on a domain name lookup tool until I found 2 things that sounded good together, and I could kind of come up with like a backwards explanation of why I chose them. And for that, I pay $36 a year. I bought bloodknife.com, bloodknife.net, and bloodknife.org. For hosting, you're going to need hosting of some kind. Again, there's free hosting out there. WordPress has its own self-hosted solution, which doesn't cost any money. It does have some ads at the bottom, but you can get pretty far for $0. For a variety of reasons, though, the $10 a month I think is very worth it, because it gets you things like backups, it gets you extra tools. It's going to be a lot faster. You have complete control over your hosting. And the last thing that's essential for a publication, if you're going to be self-sufficient, you're going to pay people, is revenue. The process of getting revenue, we use exclusively Patreon for that. And that's mostly for ease of use. We've investigated other solutions for it. I investigated other solutions when I started this. Patreon for me was still the best. The reason for that is a few things. One, it integrates directly with WordPress, which is the CMS that we ultimately wound up using. It takes a percentage of the revenue, so there's no upfront cost. It handles all of the payment processing and credit card processing. It's very lightweight. I devote maybe 10 minutes a month towards thinking about dealing with, the Patreon. For the most part, it just, it gets us money and support that we're able to use as revenue to run the magazine. There we go. What does a magazine want? You're going to want content management. You can do it without a content management backend. You can do just raw HTML. I would not recommend it. You're going to wind up managing a lot of content. We probably have, we've published probably a couple hundred articles at this point. Actually, I want to say about 130, probably 140. If we were just doing handwritten HTML, that would be pretty unbearable. And having a content management platform solves a lot of problems. It causes a lot of problems too. Luckily, WordPress is essentially free. Most for Bluehost, if you pay for something like Bluehost or I'm trying to remember the name. I'm totally blanking on it, but there's another really common WordPress platform out there that's comparable in price, but it's usually like a self-install package. It's very simple, doesn't require a lot of technical know-how, and you can mess around with it until you understand it. Design, you're going to want a cool looking design, because I think we overlook how important kind of the both the accessibility and the tangibility of a website is nowadays in defining who you are and getting people interested. I basically just bought an off-the-shelf WordPress theme, and then I customized it a little bit because it was a $50 one-time fee. It's called Tetsuo. You can I wanted to do something that was cyberpunk influenced, and so I looked for cyberpunk WordPress themes, and I found one that I liked, and I reconfigured it until it looked like a magazine. The last thing that you're going to want as a magazine is traffic. Most of ours comes from Twitter. About 70 to 80% of it ultimately comes from Twitter. It varies over time. Some articles would get shared places like Y Combinator. But traffic, if you are clever, can be free. In fact, should be free. And I'll talk a little bit more later about processes for getting traffic. So right now we are up to $96. We have the $50 for the theme template, the $10 for the hosting, which is granted, it's $10 a month. But I did say to start. So, over the course of a year, you could go lower. I think there's even a $5 tier. Actually, I think we started out at like a $2 tier. And then $36 for, gosh, I don't remember what that was. For the domain name. So it comes out to $96 currently. Next, you're going to need some articles. So for Blood Knife, we started off with a model where we did 4 articles each month, roughly 1 for each week, so that each week we could put out or release or announce a new article. So what goes into an article? Words, and at start we had 800-word articles that we paid $40 for, which I thought was an acceptable number to start with for something that was completely bootstrapped. Although one of our goals was to rapidly raise that, and we did. I'm very happy about that we were able to, but that was our starting point. An interesting, relevant topic. You're going to want people to care about the article. If nobody cares about it, nobody's going to read it. No one's going to continue reading it. So it has to be interesting and relevant in some way. Maybe it's a topic that is current. Maybe it's a topic that is, controversial. And this, I think, applies just as much to fiction as to nonfiction. It has to, it has to be interesting. It has to be a good story. It has to be relevant to what people care about in some way. That's how you get people to actually care about what you're putting out. And lastly, from an article standpoint, for me, I wanted analysis, not just facts. I didn't just want reporting. There's a lot of reporting out there. It's very hard to compete in just nonfiction reporting. I wanted analysis. I wanted takes. I wanted discourse. That'll get people to talk about it. So how we make articles is we start off by soliciting pitches. You can email me pitches at kurt@bloodknife.com. Many people do. We either accept them or we pass on them. I look at pitches and I say, is it relevant? Is it interesting? Are people going to read this and care about it? Is it relevant to our audience? Is it relevant to right now? Has it been done before? If it's been done before, I mostly don't want it. Just because, I want to find new stuff. There's plenty of new stuff out there to write about. After a pitch has been accepted, we move on to the draft. In this case, it was originally 800 words. Typically now it's more like 1800 to 2400 is a typical article length for us. I look at it, I see, did they write what we agreed upon? Can it be expanded? Are there things that are missing? Does it feel complete? Does it feel like it could go somewhere else that it doesn't currently and do more stuff? I do some revisions. I read through it. I say, hey, I might do a little bit of line editing, but initially I'll typically say, hey, I feel like you should add a paragraph here. I think we should, rearrange things. I think that this needs to be revisited. This particular paragraph isn't clear. I'll kick those revisions back to the writer. I always give a date up front where I say, hey, can you give me the first draft by here? And then I've gotten really slow with revisions, which is something I'm going to come back to later. It's something that we're working on, both me personally and the magazine as a whole. But I typically would prefer to give myself like a week or two to do revisions. And then I like to give at least 2 or 3 weeks back to the writer to do the revisions as well. Once the revisions are done, then I do the editing where I'll do spelling, grammar. I'll read for sensitivity. I might ask other people to take a look at the article if it's something that is outside of my comfort zone to be, a good judge of the content. Honesty, above all, I feel like it is, the easiest way to get attention for things online is to lie. We really pride ourselves on not misconstruing or lying about things. If there's a simplified explanation that misconstrues the facts, I really prefer to push the writer to find something more tangible to grapple with and to just present things more honestly, which is not to say unbiased. We are essentially a communist publication, I'll say that, or a far left publication. So we have a very obvious and very stated political slant. So we're not trying for neutrality, but we are still trying for honesty. Then we pay. Very important. At launch, I think we paid 4.5 or 5 cents a word. We now pay 9 cents a word. Getting that up was our first major goal. And I always try to pay before publication. In rare cases, I will allow some. In rare cases, sometimes the writers may not be able to accept payment immediately, and that in that case, sometimes I will be okay with publishing before payment is received. But I really feel like, back to our value that as a publication, it's important to pay as quickly as possible, as upfront as possible. So $40 times 3, plus the 96, you're up to 216. So that was me writing 1 article a month, and then 3 from other writers. Checking on the time, I still got 20 minutes, doing okay. So now that you've got your articles and you've got your website up, if you want to be self-sufficient, I think you're really going to need to be self-sufficient unless you just want to repeatedly lose money, which in my experience is a big reason that publications shut down. I wanted this to be able to run for the long haul, and that meant not losing money on it each month. Because if you're losing money on it each month, and you're looking at it and going, well, this is costing me X amount of money each month to keep running. Is that, is that something that I can afford? Is that something, and if not, you have to find somebody else to afford it, or else you just have to stop. If it's self-sufficient, if I needed to step away from Blood Knife, I could hand the reins off to somebody else. It makes more than enough money to keep operating at this point. I could find someone else to take it over, and they could, run with it. It wouldn't be something. It becomes a not a drag, but a boon. It has value. It's not something that has to be invested into. Um, so how do we get revenue? I mentioned Patreon already. There's other ways to do that. You could take direct donations. What I like about Patreon is that it is subscription based. Most people are pretty happy. We charge $5 a month for our base tier. We have a lower tier that's $2 a month that we have a limited, like, early joiner amount of. We bring in about 875 or 850 something dollars a month in revenue, entirely through Patreon, entirely from subscribers. We have different tiers. Everyone who subscribes to the Patreon gets exclusive content, at least initially exclusive. What we do is, when we put up a new issue, we have 2 or 3 articles that are free for everyone to read. The rest are Patreon locked. Oh, what do I consider a fair rate for an 800-word article? It's a complicated question. I'll be honest. Here's how I came up with the $40 for an 800. So I think that $40 for 800 words is reasonable. No, not at all. It's an important question. I think that $40 for 800 words is reasonable to a point, provided it's something that doesn't require a ton of, like, original research. The ultimate answer is as much as you can afford is the ultimate answer. We reinvest everything that we bring in revenue wise into writers and artists and designers. I don't take any money from it. None of our editorial staff gets paid. It all goes to the writers. So as we've brought in new revenue, we've either raised the rate or raised the amount that we publish. I think that 30 to 40 is an okay starting amount for an independent publication for an 800-word article. If you're IGN or Screen Rant, which I found out pays $30 for an article, that's unacceptable to me. They can pay more than that. If you're a small independent publication, I think the answer is what you can afford to pay. But I would try to make it at least $20 to $40. Personally, that feels to me like a relatively fair amount. I hope that answered your question. And I'll emphasize, I think from an ethical standpoint and from my own personal politics, raising that as much as possible has been my number one goal at every point. We would now pay, I don't even know how much it is. If we were paying now for an 800-word article, it would be $72 for an 800-word article now, which I feel very good about. I think that's a more than reasonable amount. I think I'd like it to be even higher, and we're going to get there eventually. But anyway, yeah. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to ask. How do we get people to support us? I mentioned Patreon. So exclusive content, we put everything up we put a couple things up for free initially. Everything else is locked to people's Patreon backer accounts. So people who are subscribers can log in through our website with their Patreon account and access the additional articles. So you get basically the whole issue, which we update about once a month. For subscribers get the whole thing right away. Everyone else has to wait, and we gradually unlock articles. Another reason that people will support you is just honestly out of the kindness of their heart. Most people, I think, don't support us because they desperately want the articles right away. I think they like what we're doing, and people want us to be able to continue doing it. So, if you really care about what you're making, I think other people will care too. But in terms of how to get people to support you, the most important things are ask them to and ask them to again. I think a lot of publications aren't, frankly, pushy enough with trying to get people to support them. We have it on the side rail. We have it at the bottom of each article. We have it at the bottom of the site. We post about it on social media all the time. We're clear about what the cost is. We're clear about what people are getting. And, in general, we lose probably about 5 to 10 subscribers a month, and we gain, you know, 8 to 15 subscribers a month. So we have, generally we have trended upwards in subscribers. We do have like a bit of churn, but I would say most of our subscribers have been with us for over a year at this point, which feels great. Um, if you want to grow, you're going to need visibility. So how do you get people to find you? For us, the number one answer has been social media. Um, we post everything that we publish at least once a week. I try to post something old or new, preferably new. We put all our articles up at once, and then basically once a week, give or take, we post, hey, here's a new article. I try to do like a short little interesting snippet. I think I forgot to put a screenshot here, but uh, I wanted to make the point that let me check ahead. Oh no, okay, it's on the next slide. So social media, we posted ourselves. Uh, our contributors are another big way that people find us. Early on, we sought out people who had a bigger following than us. So we went to people who had 40,000 followers on Twitter, and we said, hey. I really like what you produce as a writer or as a content creator. Would you be interested in contributing something, a paid piece for our magazine? I would love if you were interested in writing about this particular topic. If someone writes for you, they will almost always tweet about it or post about it on their own networks. If they have a bigger network than you, then now you've gotten the visibility of their networks. People are usually more than happy to do that, and that was the main way that we grew early on, was by seeking out people who had a platform and would, say, "Hey, I wrote this cool article for this cool magazine. Go check it out," and then people would find it, and then they became our audience as well. Earned media. You can get coverage. We've had a couple articles that went viral enough to be shared very widely. The most well-known one is I always fumble the name. Everyone is beautiful. Everyone is beautiful, but nobody is horny, which came out last March, and that got us covered in the New York Times. It got us written up in Slate and NPR. The writer Raquel Benedict, a dear friend of mine to whom I owe a great deal, has also been invited on radio shows to talk about it, and that got us a lot of coverage. You can also earn your own coverage. When we have something that's relevant, I'll send it somewhere like File 770, other sci-fi blogs, and say, hey, we've got this article. I think it would be interesting to your readership. Would love it if you are open to sharing it with your audience. And people are, usually happy to do that. Quality. If you devote time to producing quality content, it will get you visibility. But the number one thing is patience. The first 4 or 5 months, we had less than 1,000 views a month, and man, did I feel low. I was like, nobody's reading this website. Is it even worth doing? By month 6, we were in the 5 and 10,000 a month range for traffic. But it requires patience. It is slow. Your followers are going to grow slowly. Don't expect an overnight thing. It takes time. This is how we roll out an article. And this, to me, is the most important thing of our model, because this is where the majority of our traffic comes from. The first thing is to get it right, by which I mean make sure that it looks nice. Make sure you have a nice piece of artwork so that it embeds nicely on Twitter. So for this article, for this example, we ran an interview in February by Claire. I totally forget Claire's full name, but she is Lone Claire on Twitter, and she interviewed Gretchen Felker Martin about the very wonderful novel Manhunt. And it was a great interview. So I wanted it to be presented as best as possible to our audience. So I made sure that there was some nice eye-catching artwork. I think it looks really bad when like a big publication posts something and it doesn't even embed properly. Like there's no image. That image is like that's the sizzle on your steak. That's what gets people to click. I tried to make the intro text interesting. I tried to make the title interesting. And then I populated that little the metadata snippet so that it would embed with like a little short summary of the article. All that makes it come across better, and that's what I mean by like get it right. So publish it, get it up. post it to social media. Like I said, we have Facebook and Twitter are the big ones for us. Twitter much more so than Facebook. We have a gentleman who does a lot of work for us reposting things on Facebook. He runs our Facebook page. He also finds like Facebook groups that that might appreciate the article, and he'll drop a link in there in a non-annoying way. When we post to Twitter or Facebook, we, whenever possible, tag the author in the subject. People love to reshare the article. If they like the article, they will repost it, and that expands the reach. Then we tell our friends and our enemies about it. If you like something, if you are making something that is true to your own interests, it's probably true to your friends' interests. Make sure that your friends are aware of it. Make sure that you are crowing about it, in a reasonable volume. And sometimes that will occasionally spur controversy. I think you don't need to be terrified of controversy. You should always be considerate of, whether you are doing like actual damage. But in general, I think that controversy is something that will be natural for publishing, and you just have to be prepared to approach it rationally, consider your actions, trust your instincts. And sometimes it's just going to be controversial, and you're just gonna have to weather it. Next, you wait, and then you post it again. This is very important. I see a lot of publications post just like a one and done thing. And you're going to have to get over your fear of a self-promotion if you're going to do that. And that means retweeting your own stuff, a day later. I like to do it. If I post on like a Thursday night, I'll repost it on like a Saturday morning. You get like a different audience, a different readership. So wrapping up, some things that I've learned and goofed up at, and I'm just going to run through these. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in, but this is kind of the advice portion of the article. Actually, before I do this, I'll just say real quick. So we launched in July 1st, 2020. Our Patreon went up. July 30th, our first issue, which I foolishly named issue 0. There is no issue 3 because I realized when I did issue 2 that we were on our 3rd issue, and now people thought there was one less than there actually was. So I skipped over issue 3, so there is no issue 3. But anyway, our issue 0 went live on July 30th, 2020. August 1st, the day after, we had enough coming in from our Patreon to raise our per word rate from 5 cents a word to 7.5 cents a word. So we went from $40 per 800 word article to $60 per 800 word article. September was our first issue to break 2,000 views in a month. December was our first to break 5,000 views. January 2021 was our first actual viral piece that brought in real traffic and broke 10,000 views. Like I said, it took about 6 months before anybody really cared about what we were publishing. On March 12th of last year, we became self-sufficient and were able to cover our total expenses, which by then were up to about $400 a month. In April, we were able to raise our pay to 9 cents a word, and in January of this year, we doubled our self-sufficiency budget and are now expanding the amount that we pay and the amount that we publish. So I wanted to give that timeline real quick. But again, it took like 6 months to get there. I've got 5 minutes. I'm gonna run through this real quick. Don't sell yourself short. Don't call yourself a blog. Call yourself a magazine. You are doing something valuable and worthwhile, and you should respect it if you want other people to respect it. Don't undercut yourself. Really own what you're doing. Act like it's important, and other people will also accept that it's important. Trust your instincts. You are going to be the best judge of what you're trying to do than anyone else. Listen to other people, but at the same time, ultimately you have to trust your gut on things. The only things I have ever regretted with Blood Knife, the only articles I have regretted running, are things where I didn't trust my instincts and I talked myself out of my concerns. This is a big one. Be willing to ask for things. Ask people to help you. Ask people to post about your magazine. Ask people to contribute things. Ask people if they're willing to, write something about it. Ask people if they're willing to cover it. People love to help, but you have to ask. You have to get over that terror, which I have really bad social anxiety. But you have to get over stuff like that and ask for help, ask for things, and you will often get them. Reinvest. I believe every cent that we get, I put back into the magazine, and that I think has really helped us grow, and has helped us, really stay focused on what was important to us and not worry about, like, can we make money out of this? I don't care. I don't make any money out of it, but I don't lose any money, and that's all that I can ask ultimately. And to be able to pay people to write cool things. Political leaning. I just said it right now. Yes, I definitely think it would be successful. I think that Patreon, if you have to assume that if you like something, other people like it too. This is why I keep saying, like, be true to yourself. If you think that if you would be willing to pay for something, I bet there's other people that are too. The matter is just finding them, and that takes patience and effort. But again, like, don't doubt that what you're doing has value. With fiction, there's fiction Patreons that do quite well. I think you just have to beat the drum, and it may take time. You may have to wait for one of those stories to blow up. But I think it can really work. And again, I really think that monthly subscription model, part of demonstrating value is asking for something in exchange and saying, hey, if you think this is valuable, will you support it? And I think the fact that we ask for support also helps people realize the value of what we do. And I think that holds true regardless of what your politics are, personally. Good question. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking, other Kurt. Admit your mistakes. I'll admit a mistake right now. Our response rate for fiction, we do publish fiction, our response rate has been abysmal, terrible. I have things that people have been patiently waiting for a year. I'm really working to improve that. Part of that has been asking for help. It took me a long time to learn to ask other people for help. This is, again, number 6, don't bite off more than you can chew. I did bite off more than I could chew. But you have to be willing to admit your mistakes, listen to other people when they tell you that you're wrong. Here's a mistake. I've got 2 minutes left. I went longer than I planned to. 7 is a big one. Take time to celebrate and enjoy what you're doing. Don't let it become a burden. And above all, if you're the sole heart of the magazine, if you're doing 80% of the work and it overwhelms you, you're not going to be able to keep doing it, and then it's going to die. So, if you need a break, step away, enjoy what you're doing, celebrate it, cut back if you need to, appreciate the value of what you're doing, feel good about it. When you get an issue out, give yourself some time to celebrate and feel good about it. That ultimately is what will keep you going. And then most of all, be gracious. You're going to need a lot of help from a lot of people, whether they're co-contributors, my awesome co-contributors, Trev and Sam, who help out with the editing and the art. Whether it's all our contributors, you're going to have to thank a lot of people. Make sure that you are thanking them and being gracious. And I will end 1 minute ahead of schedule by being gracious to you all for watching and paying attention and asking some great questions. So thank you for showing up at 1 a.m. my time. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to bug me on here, on the Fights Have Found Your Discord, on Twitter. I'm Mechanical Kurt on Twitter. You can also email me at kurt@bloodknife.com. We are at bloodknife.com. You can find us and support us at patreon.com/bloodknife. And now it is 1:50 and I shall vacate. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that's been helpful.